What's up, everyone? It's Dakota, and welcome back to another Magic the Gathering video. And today, we're going to be taking a look at the Amulet Titan deck for the Modern format. More specifically, the list piloted by Peter Husisian, who ended up actually winning Regional Championship Portland with this list. There's a lot of cool things going on. Beat a lot of Breach in the top 8, beating 2 players, one in the quarters and one in the finals. It was a pretty exciting tournament overall. We do have a full recap of the tournament over on the video that we posted yesterday, so go ahead and check that out, of course, after you get done watching this video. But we're going to be hoping to do this deck some justice because there's kind of a lot of moving pieces going on, so I'm going to kind of go over, some of the things that you need to know and kind of some of the cool things that this deck is capable of. There's definitely resources out there of people that have, probably should get like degrees, like 4-year degrees of like actually playing Amulet Titan and being able to, navigate this deck as efficiently as possible, because this deck is not something you can just pick up and play. It definitely has some very basic lines that are, I think, very obvious to players, but at the same time, there's a bunch of different, situations that you can end up getting in that other Amulet Titan players that have been playing the deck for a while just seemingly know how to navigate, which is kind of weird because I don't think that there's a lot of other players. Amulet Titan players are a special breed. Let's just leave it at that. But of course, before we get in too deep into the deck and we talk about Amulet Titan today, and I hope to do it some justice, maybe not, I don't know. I personally don't care for the deck. Boo you. But before we get too deep into the deck, if you're not subscribed to the channel and you want to see more videos from me, where we post mainly about the modern and standard formats, as well as some other longer form videos, doing breakdowns of some pretty big events. We're going to be looking to do another one for the Regional Championship coming to Charlotte, and of course the Pro Tour is coming up, I believe, later this month as well, that we're going to be doing a full breakdown day by day of what actually goes on in the tournament. So if you want to be notified when that stuff goes on, you have to subscribe and ring notification bell, because English is hard, and that's an easy way to support me and my content. Of course, if you learn anything or you just enjoy the video, please leave a like on it, as it does help with the algorithm, and it does make me feel pretty good when I see that little number go up. So, I do really greatly appreciate that. Lastly, I have a few links in the description down below. I have a link to my podcast channel, the Casual Spikes podcast, where me and my co-host Randy over at MTG with Randy talk about the things going on in the competitive formats. Currently, we're going over the regional championships in Modern, as well as kind of going over the metagame that we expect at those regional championships, and of course, looking at standard as well, because it is the current RCQ season, and anything else that could potentially affect the competitive formats of Magic. So definitely go ahead and subscribe over there if you want more more content based on that. I also have a link to my Twitch channel that you can go down in the description as well. Click it, follow me on Twitch. I do greatly appreciate that. Lastly, I want to shout out the sponsor of the channel, Manatraders, where if you use my code in the description down below, you get 5% off your monthly subscription, where you can go and rent cards and play in the various different formats on Magic Online. Definitely a very good tool for playtesting. I've had my Manatraders account for about 5 years now, and I'm just happy with it. They are just constantly upgrading their service and making it more user-friendly and things like that. So definitely go check them out if you're interested in playing Magic, especially if you're interested in renting this deck. It is fairly cheap online, all things considered, so definitely go and check them out if you're interested. And let's go ahead and talk about this Amulet Titan deck. So there's 2 parts to this Amulet Titan deck, and both pieces are obviously very important, for your 2-card combo here. But the big thing that kind of starts to instigate some of the shenanigans that this deck is able to get into is this card, Amulet of Vigor, a 1-mana artifact that says whenever a permanent enters the battlefield tapped under your control, you untap it. Now, this isn't something that just happens. You don't play like a shock land tapped and then it just automatically comes into play untapped. There's actually a trigger that will go on the stack when a permanent you control enters the battlefield tapped, which is important because, why would I need to untap more than one thing at one time? Well, when you have lands that come into play tapped and you have multiple amulets in play, you get multiple untap triggers and your land will untap multiple times. So you can, in theory, play a shock land tapped with 2 amulets in play. Amulet's going to say, all right, well, we're going to untap this land since it entered the battlefield tapped. Even if you had the choice to untap it, it'll untap. You can tap it for, we'll say, a blue mana, and then the land will untap again for the other amulet trigger, to which then you'll be able to tap it for more mana. Now, while using it on lands that come into play tapped and being able to add like 1 or 2 mana, like be able to add mana the turn it comes into play, or with multiple amulets add an extra 1, 2, 3 mana the turn it comes into play, is fine. But there's a specific set of lands that we're looking to use to actually abuse the fact that Amulet of Vigor puts a trigger on the stack to untap it. And we're going to be looking at cards like Simic Growth Chamber, who is apparently really shy, but there they are. Simic Growth Chamber and Gruul Turf. Both of these lands enter the battlefield tapped, And then when they enter the battlefield, you have to return a land you control to its owner's hand. So you'll hear them call them like Karoo lands, bounce lands, whatever the case may be. Ideally, with the design of this card, you play like a land, whatever, and then you can play Growth Chamber, and it's going to tap for basically 2 colors of mana whenever you tap it 4 mana, and then you're going to have to return a land to your hand, so it's like a little bit slower. You can use like your 1 mana, whatever. That's cool. But with these lands, the fact that they come into play tapped and they bounce a land to your hand, you can actually play these and bounce themselves, which is the idea of like you can't just play this on turn 1. So you play Simic Growth Chamber, comes into play tapped, and you have 2 amulets in play, let's say. You're going to be able to untap it, tap it for blue and a green, untap it, tap it for a blue and a green, and return it to your hand. Now, that's a lot. I mean, you can make 4 mana off of 1 land drop. You're just never going to accumulate lands. So how is this deck casting its 6 mana namesake of the deck? Well, there's a few different ways. We have different creatures that allow us, and different things really, to put additional lands into play. So the big one being Arboreal Grazer. This is one where it can definitely be used as like a Black Lotus, or rather a Dark Ritual type like ritual effect, where you can say play an amulet on turn 1, then the next turn you play an amulet, and then you play a Simic Growth Chamber. You end up making 4 mana because of 2 amulets in play. Then you play Arboreal Grazer. You have 3 mana left, and then you put the Simic Growth Chamber back into play. That's going to net you 7 total mana, which is really good considering that this deck also gets to play Green Sun Zenith. So you're able to spend a green and then the 6 other mana to go search for a green creature with a converted mana cost 6 or less, put it into play. Or you're able just to outright cast a Primeval Titan, which is kind of the idea of this deck. You want to get this down ASAP, and then there's a few options that you have from here. So Primeval Titan, 6 mana, 6/6 trample. When it enters the battlefield or attacks, you may search your library for up to 2 land cards, put them on the battlefield tapped, then shuffle your library. Typically, from what you'll see, depending on how many amulets are in play, like if you only have 1 amulet in play, which is a little bit harder to then cast like the turn 2 Titan, I think it's theoretically possible, but I'm not 100% sure. There's a gut feeling that tells me it's not. But in this cases, we'll say that you only have 1 amulet in play, maybe an opponent blows 1 up. You can look for something like Hanweir Battlements, which I need to not be shy right now because I think the picture's taking away. But Hanweir Battlements is a land that can literally just go away. So for a red and tapping it, you can actually give a creature haste. So ideally, you play a Titan, and then you give the creature haste, and then you get to attack with it, and then you get some other lands. Typically, you can go and get something like Urza Sagas if you want to start kind of generating some value. This is going to allow you to look for Amulet of Vigors, Expedition maps, and things like that, and also make constructs to where you can start making a pretty big construct army with just being able to add a ton of mana thanks to your lands. And again, if you make like 4, 5, 6 constructs with these Urza Sagas, you end up getting more amulets, which means that you have some even more explosive amulet turns. Even in some cases as well, if you have multiple amulets in play, you can go get this card Mirror Pool. So it enters tapped. It taps for a colorless mana. You can pay 2 and a colorless, sacrifice, and you copy a target instant sorcery spell. I'm sure that there's probably times where it comes up where you could probably Green Sun for a ton of mana, and then you can Mirror Pool copy it. But I can almost guarantee you that's not what's happening. Usually it's the bottom part of this card where it's 4 mana and a colorless, and you tap it and sacrifice it. You put a token on the battlefield as a copy of target creature you control, which you can then end up, getting this plus, some other kind of lands. Like you can go and get something like Lotus Field, where you can go and generate, 6 mana off of Lotus Field with 2 amulets, plus making the colorless mana for Mirror Pool, meaning that you have some mana floating left over, and then you can Mirror Pool, copy Primeval Titan, and get to do the thing all over again until you're able to get Hanweir Battlements and a red producing land that is then going to add, allow you to give those Titans haste, attack, and do some more things. There's a lot of crazy things kind of going on here to set up. And then ways to kind of increase our consistency, and one of our win conditions is Valakut the Molten Pinnacle. Thanks to this card, Dryad of the Elysian Grove, we can play an additional land on our turn, so it helps with making extra land drops to hopefully make a ton of mana to get towards casting a Primeval Titan or Green Sun Zenithing for a Primeval Titan. Our lands are also every basic land type in addition to their other types, so Valakut caring about mountains and dealing 3 damage if you control at least 5 other mountains means that we can also play Scapeshift in our deck. And it doesn't matter what we end up getting. We can just get a ton of lands as long as we get Valakut and like 7 other lands. I can't remember the exact math, but I think if you have essentially Dryad and then you get Valakut and 5 other lands, it's 18 damage. And then if you're able to make a copy of Valakut, which Vesuva can't actually copy Valakut, sad, when you're going and getting it. But you can technically Vesuva copy Valakut if Valakut's already in play. But you can end up dealing tons and tons of damage to your opponent with different Valakuts and getting a ton of lands. And then also, again, these bounce lands do help with this Valakut / Dryad Elysian Grove plan, because when you're able to play multiple lands and your one land's a bounce land, you're going to be able to deal 3-6 damage to your opponent for the first one, 3-6 for the other one, and so on, depending on how many Valakuts and how many land drops you have. So pretty neat there. Aftermath Analyst was kind of a card I think that Canister really started playing with, and I don't know if this is necessarily mainstream for the Amulet Titan decks. Maybe someone that knows a little bit more than me can tell me. But when this enters play, you mill 3 cards, and you can pay 4 mana, and you sacrifice the Analyst and return all lands from your graveyard to the battlefield tapped. And I believe with Shifting Woodlands, Lotus Field, and I believe there was like another card. I think Echoing Deeps doesn't really help. But like with Lotus Field plus Shifting Woodlands, you can make like Shifting Woodlands a copy of Dryad Elysian Grove. You can bring a ton of lands back, and then Lotus Field will sacrifice those lands. And if you have like Mirror Pool, you can say float like a bunch of mana. So you have Amulets in play, and you have like Lotus Fields, Mirror Pools, and Shifting Woodland, which seems like a lot of stuff, but when you're milling a lot of cards and you're kind of going through your deck and everything like that, it's probably going to be pretty easy. You can essentially make enough mana to where you can Mirror Pool, copy a Titan. You go and search for 2 lands. You end up floating a bunch of mana. And then you're able to have Shifting Woodlands copy the Aftermath Analyst. You'll sacrifice the Shifting Woodlands, that's the copy of Aftermath Analyst, to the Analyst ability to then go and bring all these lands back. So Shifting Woodlands comes back, and of course Mirror Pool, Lotus Field, all these other lands that you sacrificed. And you can generate enough mana to where you can keep copying the Aftermath Analyst, as long as you have Delirium, of course. You can keep copying the Aftermath Analyst and going over and over and over again, getting as many Titans as you need, and then just being able to give them haste and attack your opponent for a bunch with infinite Titans, essentially, and you can fail to find to ensure that you just don't die, and you're not milling yourself every time because the Shifting Woodland's already in play, and the Analyst only mills when it enters the battlefield, not if it was already currently on the battlefield. So you're not going to mill yourself out doing this, and you have a pretty cool win condition nonetheless, which I believe this player, Peter, ended up actually doing it in the Game 3 finals of the event. So, I mean, that was, like, kind of neat, because I'm thinking, like, oh my gosh, wow, that does work. Some of the other cool lanes that the deck plays, 3 Boseiju in the main, probably just a card that's necessary. Crumbling Vestige is an interesting one, because when it enters the battlefield, you can have it add 1 mana of any color to your mana pool. It enters tapped, and it taps for a colorless mana. So this is like another land that you can play that will enter tapped, that will untap, and it can give you 2 mana. It's just not nearly as good as the bounce lands, because it won't actually bounce itself. But this is also a land that you can play tapped. It's going to give you a green mana, and then you can put just one of these bounce lands into play off of an Arboreal Grazer. I don't know why I keep going to Dry Arbor, but you can put it into play from a Arboreal Grazer, and you'll be able to bounce this, and you're going to be able to still generate mana with this, on top of being able to get one of your bounce lands in play to kind of set it up and give you like 3 mana on the next turn to potentially play like a Dryad, which then you can play like another bounce, another Growth Chamber, or another Gold Surf to kind of play this fair-ish ramp game that the Amulet Titan deck can play and do to some success. Echoing Deeps is an interesting one. Enters the battlefield tapped as any land card in the graveyard except this cave addition to other types. So you could have this come into play as like one of these tap lands. You know, maybe like a bounce land that got blown up, a Valakut, or even like not really Teleria West, Urza Saga even. So definitely a card that can allow you to be grindy and probably do some interesting combo things as well, because you can go and get something like Lotus Field that's in your graveyard that you had maybe sacrificed to itself to kind of keep this chain going of just adding a ton of mana, playing more Titans, and so on. Sideboard, we have 1 Bojuka Bog, 2 Collector Oof, Keen Eye Curator. Collector Oof seeming like a pretty good one, especially when we talked about a lot of these green creatures. I think being very good as hate pieces, I think Collector Oof is a pretty good one. Keen Eye Curator doesn't care about green mana like the way that the Scavenging Ooze does. So this is able to eat just cards from the graveyard, and then if there are 4 more card types exiled among them with Keen Eye Curator, it gets +4/+4 and has trample. So, you know, essentially a 7/7 like Trampler is pretty huge and hard to deal with. 3 Dismember, we have 2 Dryad Elysian Grove, and Endurance, Grist the Hunger Tide, 3 Vampire's Vengeance. Deals 2 damage each non-vampire creature, and you create a blood token and Force of Vigor. Playing 76 cards total, 61 cards in the main. Absolute mad lad, but who can really say otherwise when Peter ended up actually winning the whole event with this deck. Overall, I mean, I probably haven't even really scratched the surface of this Amulet Titan deck. It is absolutely insane. Some of the things that it's able to do, some of the boards it's able to cobble together, and really, it's just one top deck away, it seems like, at all times of being a deck that just wins the game out of nowhere. And I can't tell you how many games I played, even back in like 2016, 2017, playing Death Shadow against Amulet Titan, and being able to counter, their summoners packs and things like that. And it's just like, okay, well, I got basically everything else beat. And it's like, oh, hey, here's like, I drew my 1 of Cavern of Souls, so now I can go and cast, this Titan for, and it can't be countered or anything like things like that. Just absolutely insane stuff where it's like, man, you think you have the Amulet Titan deck beat, and then all of a sudden, again, we're just one top deck away, and it's like, oh, hey, cool, I found this piece that's going to go get this piece, that's going to go get that piece, that's going to go get a Titan, and at really no point you're able to stop kind of what is going on, because your counters and the stuff that you want to play doesn't really line up with what the heck they have going on, which is absolute sadness, and it makes me despise the Amulet Titan deck even more. But for now, I think it might be just the hero, the format needs to take down some of the Breach decks. But, let me know in the comments down below if you made it this far, what you think of the Amulet Titan deck. Of course, subscribe to the channel if you aren't already done so. Of course, check out the various different links and things like that in the description down below. I will have the deck list linked down there as well if you want to go ahead and check that out. But that's going to do it for me in this video. Hope you all enjoyed it. I hope to see you all in the next one.